Hey, if you look up Jim's Art Studio, they have this beautiful Ukrainian sunflower. It's absolutely worth checking out. All the profits are going to go to help Ukrainian charity, so please check it out. It'll be great. All the links will be below in the description and probably here in the picture. But yeah, go help them out. Ukrainians are going through hell right now.
This organized chaos video is brought to you by Jim's Art Studio. Jim's Art Studio is an online store that allows access to prints that you can use for most anything, obviously as just a picture, or as a wallpaper, or as a bookmark, or anything you can think of. You can find Jim's Art Studio at etsy.com/shop/Jim's Art Studio. This video is also brought to you by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hey, welcome to another episode of the Chaos Hour or whatever, the thing where I talk about random stuff and then react to a video. For the reaction today, I'm going to be covering a request. As for random stuff on the news, not a whole lot's happening unless you count the Supreme Court hearing that is dominating everything right now. For what it's worth, what I know of Ketanji Brown Jackson, and I'm certain I'm slaughtering that name, she seems pretty solid. I think she's a decent pick. I was just looking up. Apparently, she would work as a public defender even for Guantanamo Bay detainees. And I know for lots of people, they may not be thrilled with that, but I personally feel Guantanamo Bay is illegal. I feel Guantanamo Bay should be shut down. If there's anybody in there that is a criminal, then they should be put through the normal criminal justice system, period. And if we don't have enough to even prosecute them on that grounds, then we need to let them go. It's as simple as that. And the fact that she's willing to stick her neck out and defend those people, this is actually one of the things Lindsey Graham, of all people, went after her for. And it's like, yeah, how dare you fight for the rights of people? I swear, he was almost about ready to go to tears about it. It was ridiculous. But the person I really want to highlight is Ted Cruz. Because he just sucks. His questioning, he dug out this children's book, which granted, the children's book was a little cringe. But it's like, obviously, he had his team dig out this children's book and talk to her about it and question her nonstop about CRT. And it's like, she had nothing to do with this children's book. The school he's talking about, or the children's book was being taught, was a private school, which she did know about. I didn't. I would have had no idea. And something I'm noticing, I really noticed it with his questioning, is I'm really starting to get the impression that all anti-social justice warrior means is racist, but I don't want to be called a racist. That's all that means, I swear to God. Because every time that term is brought up, it's always in reference to people of color or women, period. And it's very frustrating. There's a social justice warrior movement and then the anti-social justice warrior movement. And the anti-social justice warrior movement, I didn't entirely hate it. Yes, there's racist in there, but it was also just people kind of fighting against PC culture, which gets way out of hand sometimes, and people need to relax about it. But I feel like now that's not what the anti-social justice warrior movement is. Now all it is, it's a racist. I feel all the people with any sense have distanced themselves from that movement because that movement has become so much cringier than even the most hardcore social justice warriors. Just so bad. And Ted Cruz didn't call himself anti-social justice warrior, but he was criticizing, I don't remember his exact words, but he was criticizing social justice things. His phrasing was something like that. And it did make me wonder, if only she could ask him questions. Ted Cruz, do you support neo-Nazis? Ted Cruz, would you right now tell neo-Nazis not to vote for you and disavow their vote? I bet you he won't give you an answer to that, because that's a large part of his base. That was just my 2 cents on that. And something I kind of stumbled into last week was just talking about a channel that I appreciate or like. Ended up being Nando V Movies. But I thought, let's start with some positivity. So I'm going to recommend to you guys a YouTube channel you guys can check out. And the YouTube channel I'm going to go ahead and recommend is my co-host on the podcast. And this is flipped, so it's over here. My co-host on the podcast, Bobby Quarters. He's just getting into this production thing. And when I say he's just getting into it, I want to say he said he started around 2020. So, like, going on his third year right now, which is a lot newer than I am. But, you know, he's learning. He does this true crime podcast on his Bobby Quarters channel. So, go check that out. Subscribe, it's backwards. Go subscribe, help him out. He could use the subscriptions. And he does a lot of work helping me out with the podcast. So check him out on the podcast. And yeah, just check out his channel. Now today, the spotlight comment is the request that's going to lead into the video. Taki75. I'd love to see you react to John Campea's video essay about Man of Steel, which he considers a misunderstood masterpiece. Okay, I can do that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this up front because I've already done lots of content on Man of Steel that I don't hate that movie. I actually kind of enjoy that movie, but it's got some issues. It's seriously flawed. It's almost more a frustrating movie than what I would consider necessarily a bad movie, because it's okay. But I can see with tweaks that could be great. I could see that easily being the best Superman movie ever made by a decent margin. And instead, it just doesn't fully commit to some of the ideas it sets out, and it half-asses some story ideas. And it just ends up being fine. It's got issues I could drive a truck through. Now, as for my thoughts on John Campea, I haven't watched a whole lot of his show. I've seen a little bit. It's a streaming show, I believe, about movies and stuff. I don't really know much about John Campea, other than that he's a movie reviewer. He seems like a nice guy. That being said, I will say some of the movie reviews I've seen from him, I don't entirely disagree with him, but it seems like I largely disagree with him. But I don't want, it's not like a personal slight. He seems like a nice guy. He seems very personable and nice. So, I don't want to attack him. And if he did a lot of work on this Man of Steel video essay, I'll appreciate that. Because as someone who's done the video essay thing, I know that's a lot of work. Doing these little, reaction things is, so much easier than doing a full video essay. It's not even close. So if he does a formal full video essay on Man of Steel, which it kind of looks like he might, then good work. I do suspect I'm going to disagree with him, but like I said, I don't hate that movie. But we're going to go ahead and dive into it. So, let's see. The Case for Man of Steel, the most underrated superhero movie of all time. Let's see what he has to say.
Man of Steel is one of the greatest comic book movies ever made and easily the most underrated. Hey guys, I'm John Campea, and I've basically been saying that for about 7 years, to the point that my regular viewers are probably getting sick of hearing me say it. But I thought after all these years, I should probably do a little bit of a deeper dive into why Man of Steel, a movie that a lot of people don't even like, to be honest with you, has such a special place, and why I consider it to be so tremendously underrated. Now, I should point out before we get started here, the purpose of this video is not to convince you to like the movie if you don't like it. All film is subjective. If you don't like Man of Steel, no problem with that. But really more of a deep dive, like I said, to kind of explain and get into why I find the movie to be so compelling, so good, and truly one of the best of the genre. So without any further ado, here is my case for Man of Steel as the most underrated superhero film of all time. When talking about Man of Steel and how underrated it is, one has to remember the context in which it came out. By July of 2013, when Man of Steel debuted, there was no such thing as the DCEU yet, and it had been just 1 year since the conclusion of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. Marvel's MCU had already released 7 feature films: Iron Man in May of 2008, The Incredible Hulk in June of 2008, Iron Man 2 in April of 2010, Thor in April of 2011, Captain America: The First Avenger in July of 2011, The Avengers in April of 2012, and Iron Man 3 in April of 2013. Comic book films were on the cusp of becoming the most dominant genre at the box office, with the last 2 MCU movies, The Avengers making $1.5 billion at the box office, and Iron Man 3 making over $1.2 billion at the box office. As if the expectations for a Superman movie, the granddaddy of all superheroes, wasn't already high enough, the added inflated expectation of the MCU's success and living in the shadow of the Dark Knight trilogy took the expectations to a whole new level. But
the issues with Man of Steel aren't really expectations. Otherwise, I feel like the opinions of Man of Steel would have gotten better over time. People will have reflected back on it and said, oh, that's pretty good. Instead, they've stayed fairly consistent, where people just kind of maintain the same opinion. Sometimes when I watch it, I enjoy it. Sometimes I just think it's okay. I don't really hate, like I said, I don't hate it. It's got issues, though. That being said, the atmosphere in which it released doesn't really dictate the overall quality of the movie. It might cloud your idea of it, but like I said, over time that's gonna change. So it's been, he said 7 years, but I wonder if he did this in 2020, because it's now been 9 years and the opinion of Man of Steel hasn't really changed.
Man of Steel also faced a unique and daunting challenge that, quite frankly, the MCU films never did: a long history of beloved previous movies and TV incarnations, each of which gave audiences some understandably preconceived notions of what this Superman should be like, what this Superman should act like, and what this Superman should talk like. It was this environment that Man of Steel debuted in 2013. The environment didn't make the movie any better or any worse, but I think it's important to keep those circumstances in mind when thinking back to what the audience's initial reaction to it were. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Man of Steel itself. You see, to me, Zack Snyder's film audaciously attempts, and in my opinion achieves, some of the most bold, honest, and grounded storytelling we have ever seen in the comic book genre. It addresses both huge global issues and small, intimate, character-driven ones that culminates in a character-driven film with tremendous action and a universe-spanning mythos that delivers the best pure superhero origin story ever put to film. Right from the beginning of the movie, David Goyer's script immediately dives us into important thematic elements that play a very important part throughout the entire rest of the story.
I mean, it's all just set up at this point. Yeah, when he gets to points, I can actually argue, but right now, I'm kind of like, get to it. But I get it. You need to do a setup. He's definitely doing an essay-type format. Still Pictures is kind of unexciting, but I guess it's safe for YouTube. It's definitely safe for YouTube. David S. Goyer has a checkered history. He, I think, can write some good movies, but I think that also depends on the director. I feel like he can write a movie and you give it to a decent to okay director, they can do a good job with it. He can't direct worth a shit. So he's hit and miss.
We as an audience are initially introduced to Krypton, an advanced alien civilization that also serves as a cautionary tale for our own world. Krypton is on the brink of an ecological disaster that will destroy their planet, a race of beings whose ambition and hubris lead them to mismanage their own world's resources and was hurling them towards their ultimate doom. But this isn't some kind of heavy-handed ecological metaphor for Earth's own environmental issues. Snyder and Goyer are actually laying the foundation narratively here that culminates near the end of the film when Superman ultimately decides to save humanity over restoring Kryptonian civilization because, as Kal-El put it to Zod, Krypton had its chance. It's also here on Krypton that we
It's not exactly veiled. I mean, it's not subtle at all. That's the point of that whole line.
See the birth of Kal-El, who emerges as something of a messianic figure right from birth. The first natural...
Yeah, it's not subtle either.
Born child in their culture in centuries. Sort of the reverse of an immaculate conception, you could say. It's that messianic symbolism that resonates through the rest of the film, both as a symbol of inspiration, hope, and destiny, but also one of heaviness.
Yeah, they really clop you over the head with it, too. It's a bit much. It's a bit much. They could have toned it down a bit. It's like, we get it, dude. We get it.
Loneliness and burden that comes along with being a messianic figure that weighs on Clark and his struggle for identity later in the film. Messianic symbolism isn't anything new to Superman storytelling, but burden and identity struggle are in this medium. But we'll cover that more later. It's also here on Krypton that Snyder gives an excellent narrative upgrade to the traditional Zod-Jor-El enmity story that others have engaged in many times. In other renditions of the relationship, Zod hates Jor-El because, to put it admittedly oversimply, Jor-El foiled Zod's evil plans of conquest. But in Man of Steel, so much more depth and motivation is given. Here, Jor-El and Zod are essentially on the same side of the disaster issue. Both know Krypton is coming to ruin, and both hold the Kryptonian Council responsible for the calamity about to befall them all. Both are also resolutely committed to trying to save Krypton's future, but by radically different means.
Okay, so as far as a lot of the Krypton stuff, where he's talking about Zod and Jor-El and stuff like that, I largely agree with him. I think the Krypton stuff is interesting. I think the idea of genetic engineering is interesting and how it's destroying this world. And I think it's interesting. And essentially, like, they're two of the only leaders that recognize the world's going to die. But Jor-El wants to do something new to keep it going, whereas Zod wants to keep on doing the same old shit. I think that's cool. But yeah, it's like the first, half hour of the movie max.
So when Jor-El embeds the Kryptonian Codex, the genetic code for billions of future Kryptonians, into his son Kal-El and sends them both off into space, Zod sees it as a betrayal of Krypton itself, dooming their civilization to extinction. In Zod's eyes, Jor-El is the villain. This gives fantastic narrative depth to the rage Zod feels against Jor-El later on in the film. There is no bitterness.
What is this music anyway? It's a bit obnoxious.
that can equal one that comes from betrayal. Zod's flawed perception of events is that Jor-El betrayed him and Krypton instead of the other way around. The other brilliant thing this turn of events does is that it fleshes out in a much better way than previous iterations of Superman stories why Zod is so hell-bent on capturing and later killing Kal-El. You see, in previous movies, Zod just hated Superman because, well, he hated his daddy, which is fine, but taking that animosity, which was already deepened because of the betrayal perception of Zod, and adding it to the element of the Codex being in Kal-El adds to the depth and motivation for Zod later on. He doesn't just want Kal-El to settle some juvenile...
I mean, this is all true, but I feel like he's acting like this is subtle. This is very much in the movie. Zack Snyder is not subtle in this movie. Michael Shannon is not subtle in this movie. It is 100% there. These aren't secrets hidden. These aren't new revelations. I mean, he's right. They do develop Zod better in this movie than we normally get. He's a bit more than the maniacally evil villain, but he's still the villain. And like I said, I feel like he's explaining this stuff like, oh, like I'm supposed to be like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. And yeah, no, it's there. It's not even subtle. That you haven't yet uncovered any hidden layers in the movie yet. I wonder if he's just gonna go through the whole story, because oof. Let's see.
Score with Clark's long-dead birth daddy, but getting Clark means, to Zod, the salvation of Krypton itself. This notion of saving Krypton as opposed to just wanting to rule Krypton gives more depth and dimension to the character of Zod, who instead of just being a mustache-twirling villain, is also a man who sees himself as having a noble purpose, the salvation of his people and civilization. The merging of the Codex into Kal-El also gives greater weight to the sacrifice that Jor-El and Lara make, ensuring the escape of...
I do kind of wish you'd move on, because my biggest issues aren't with the Kryptonian stuff. I actually thought that was interesting.
Not just their son, because let's face it, any parent would do that, but also of their entire culture's future. They're not just parents wanting to save their own kid, but also true Kryptonian patriots who also try to save the future of their people from extinction, and the warped totalitarianism that Zod would bring about were he to acquire the Codex. Goodbye, my son. Our hopes and dreams travel with you. As Kal-El's parents prepare to launch their son into the stars towards Earth, a fight breaks out between Zod and Jor-El, both fighting for what they believe to be the hope for the future of their people. By making the scene a physical manifestation of warring ideologies, Snyder turns what could have been a random generic fight between a hero and a villain into a dramatic conflict with very real narrative purpose, something that Snyder and Goyer continue to do throughout the rest of the film. Zod is ultimately captured and condemned, but what we as the audience realize during his judgment and what further drives his conviction that he was right. The Kryptonian Council and their actions condemned all of Krypton to destruction and ruin. His solution was flawed, but he was right. This whole...
Is this just gonna be a step-by-step story synopsis? Because, like, yeah, this is the movie so far, except we're having John Campea narrate it and still footage instead of, actual direction. So, like, this isn't just going to be a crappier version of the movie, is it?
Angle to Zod gives him an almost Thanos-like dimension. Whereas Thanos saw himself as the hero of the story, Zod ultimately saw himself as the hero of the story, trying desperately to save his civilization and people.
Yeah, he's not a bad villain at all. I think Zod, good art. I'm trying to think who else is there, but there's a very good argument he is the best DCEU villain. I don't think anybody's disagreed with that. And Michael Shannon chews the scenery beautifully in this movie. I don't think there's any argument there.
This conviction, based on their perceived truth, is what gives characters like Thanos and Zod another level of depth than the average movie villain. This conviction is given full credence near the end of the film when Zod is left devastated after he fails to save his people following Kal-El's destruction of the Genesis Chamber. Alright, with the planet Krypton now destroyed, we flash forward to Earth with a fully grown Clark working on a fishing boat pursuing his spirit quest to find himself and the secrets of who he really is. And our very first exposure to Clark is one that shows us his attitude towards humanity. Unlike a character like, say, Magneto, who early on in his life sees the absolute worst in humanity, Clark has seen the best in humanity. In the scene on the fishing boat, the first action we see is another fisherman risking his own life to save Clark, who would have been totally fine, but he didn't know that. Then their boat, full of just regular fishermen, races off to try to offer aid to a burning oil platform.
Now, how does he react to that? I don't recall Superman really reacting any way at all to that. He just seems kind of bored. Let's see if I can dig that up real fast, because I'm pretty sure I have Man of Steel on here. All right, so I'm going to have to give a point to Campia. This is something I've actually never noticed before, because he saves Clark's life, and then there's a very subtle smile on Clark's face afterwards. I recall there being like almost no reaction, but Clark has a little basic smile. So, yeah, I'm going to give a point to Campia on that one. I never noticed that, and that's pretty cool. I like that.
He is around mortals being heroic. It's this heroism that I believe inspires Superman to sacrifice his secret anonymous life on the fishing boat to leave the boat to save the other men on the oil rig. He goes directly from watching a frail human trying to save his life to being willing to walk away from his cover to save others. This is when we hit our first flashback of Clark as a child. This is where Man of Steel does something else kind of...
Now, I do actually have a critique of that, because we spend the first while doing the whole action scene on Krypton, and it feels like that's in place of your Act 1 action scene, which you should have in a superhero movie. Now, the issue with starting off with Superman immediately being the hero is that it devalues the actual struggle happening for Superman throughout the movie. The struggle in this movie, or at least I feel like it's set up to be the struggle, but really isn't, is the battle between his two fathers. Jonathan Kent, who wants him to just be a normal human, hide, not stick out, just be normal. And Jor-El, who wants him to be a hero, who wants him to be Superman. And this is a conflicting ideology, and he has to choose which ideology he wants. And the problem is with this opening is you already know which one he's chosen. It's already there. He's saving them all. That's a problem. You're just spoiling your whole movie. And yes, I know. We know where Superman's going to end up in the end. But the journey. You want to see the journey. You don't want to jump to the end of the journey before you get to the actual journey. We haven't even started the journey for him, and already we know where it ends.
Unusual for a comic book film. You see, most superhero origin stories portray the heroes discovering their gifts as some kind of fantastic and wonderful experience. Things like Peter Parker celebrating the freedom and power of being able to climb up buildings and swing across the city, or Shazam experimenting with his incredible new powers. Man of Steel decides to show us the confusion, fear, and panic that a kid like Clark would have felt if completely unexplainable things were suddenly happening to him.
Yeah, and it's a cool scene, and it's one scene, and then it's done.
Him. You see, it's this scene that lays out for us the approach that the filmmakers decided to take with Clark. A man in our world who realizes he is not of our world and on a journey to discover his place in it. It's not clean and polished and shiny like our traditional understanding of Superman and his origins, but it speaks to something more honest, more true, and yeah, even more real. This leads into the pivotal flashback of Clark's...
I'm sorry, this music's kind of obnoxious, man. I think it'd be better without this dumb music throughout it.
Saving the school bus. It reveals to the audience his inherent goodness, yes, but...
Yes, it just... Then he has another superhero moment, and you know the end of the origin. This one isn't as bad because it's him as a kid, and in fact, you could have kind of started with something like this, and then the father gives him the speech, no, you shouldn't do that. And that sets up the father nicely. And when I say the father, I mean Jonathan, because both Jonathan and Jor-El are his fathers. It's the battle of the Robin Hood fathers in this movie.
Also, the moral foundation given to him by his adopted father, Jonathan Kent, played brilliantly by Kevin Costner.
Brilliantly? Russell Crowe does a better job as Jor-El. Kevin Costner is kind of boring in this movie. There are moments where he's supposed to be super emotional in this, and I do not buy it for a second. He just seems completely deadpan and kind of bored to the whole thing.
The scene isn't meant so much to give us a deeper understanding of Clark per se, but rather to give us as the audience more of an understanding of Jonathan Kent. His parental love for Clark exceeds his care for anything else. The safety and
Yeah, go ahead and let kids die. It's been criticized a lot. It's essentially Jonathan meaning well, but not really knowing how to handle it, which I could forgive. But the movie treats it with too much gravity. Is that the right term? Because movies should treat it with gravity the more I think about it. But the movie is treating it like Jonathan is right. This movie wants to treat both Jonathan and Jor-El like they're right. And to a degree they are, because in the end he chooses both Clark and Superman. But that's also part of the problem. It doesn't present these two as a conflict when they're clearly set up to be a conflict. It's not at all a conflict. But it's clearly supposed to be there. It's like this story idea that they wrote and then they forgot to fucking do anything with.
Protection of Clark is Jonathan's absolute first priority. He has a sense that Clark has a destiny that will alter the fate of the world, but he also firmly believes that Clark has to discover it for himself and in his own time when he's ready. And until that time, Pa Kent will do anything to protect him. Ultimately, Jonathan Kent gives his life later in the film to protect Clark's secret.
We'll get to that.
Because in his mind, his fate and that of the world rely on it. That belief that Jonathan Kent had about Clark is summed up perfectly in the discussion that he and Clark have after the school bus incident, in which Clark says, "What was I supposed to do? Just let them die? Maybe. There's more at stake here than just our lives, Clark, or the lives of those around us. When the world finds out what you can do, it's going to change everything. Our beliefs, our notions of what it means to be human, everything. Again, this belief was so central to who and what Jonathan Kent was and his unshakable love for Clark that he later dives for the belief, which again we'll discuss a little bit later. Upon Jonathan revealing to Clark his alien origins, the most emotionally true moment I have ever seen in any comic book film in my life takes place as a...
Wow. You'd say that for anything. I mean, I guess he's making the case for it. But yeah, I would not say that for any moment of Man of Steel. Ever.
Confused and distraught Clark looks up at Jonathan and pleads with him, "Can't I just keep pretending I'm your son?" To which Jonathan, filled with reserved emotion, takes him in his arms and
Yeah, it's reserved. It's completely fucking deadpan.
claims to him, "You are my son. I love you 3,000
He delivers it better there than Kevin Costner does.
is nice and everything, but when Jonathan Kent embraces Clark and says, 'You are my son,' I nearly break down every frickin' time I see it." This also points to an absolute must-understand thing about Clark Kent. Clark could only be who he was because he was loved. He was loved unconditionally. He was loved completely, and he had the freedom to explore the struggles, uncertainty, and questions of his own existence because he knew he was so unconditionally loved by two seemingly unremarkable human parents. Parents who helped shape the decisions and direction the life of the Superman would ultimately become. The search that Jonathan tells Clark he'll...
I mean, Martha helps him with the hearing stuff, but honestly, she feels kind of sidelined through most of this movie.
Need to embark on later in his life is what leads him to discovering the Kryptonian ship and meeting Jor-El. Jor-El has similar well-meaning intentions for his son as Jonathan does, but they are also unique from Jonathan's hopes. Whereas Jonathan seems to nudge Clark towards choosing to be a good man and one that will help humanity, Jor-El sees Kal-El as much the same way, except also as a messianic figure, a guide, and possibly even maybe the ruler of humanity for them.
Yeah, their ideologies conflict. That should be the main driving force of the movie, because that's interesting. And instead, it just feels like we're going through the motions when we watch this movie. That ideological fight, it's like cooked into this movie, and they just don't like go all the way in it. It's like someone had this great idea, and then like midway through went, I don't want to commit.
This adds another layer to the internal struggle Clark must face, as his search for identity has to pass through the filters of two well-meaning, loving, and yet ideologically different fathers. It's these kinds of dynamics that sets Man of Steel apart from most run-of-the-mill comic book movie fare, and it's handled with beautiful directness and subtlety at the same time. This encounter with Jor-El leads us to what I think is the actual birth of Superman. Clark emerges through the ship doors, now in his recognizable Superman costume, and takes his first flight. I won't dwell much on this first flight scene, except to say I get chills every single time I see it. The visual style they choose of him flying was perfect. Combined with Zimmer's score, Superman's first flight is simply one of the most...
It's probably Zimmer's best score is this movie. I love the score for this movie. I will give it that. It is way better than the fucking background music for this essay. This is just,
thrilling moments in a comic book movie ever for me. Okay, we've built up to it, but this now brings us to what I believe is the most misunderstood moment of Man of Steel, and probably the most important moment.
All right, let's get to it.
The death of Jonathan Kent. There are some people who criticize Jonathan Kent's death because they saw it as unnecessary, that Clark could...
True, but I actually don't think it's unnecessary, but they don't do with it what needs to be done with it.
Easily saved Jonathan, and indeed would have saved Jonathan in that moment. But to me, that interpretation represents a lack of understanding of everything we've learned about Jonathan Kent and what he imparted to Clark and believed in the movie all the way up to this point. Remember what Jonathan tells Clark earlier in the film. You have to decide what kind of man you want to grow up to be, Clark, because whoever that man is, good character or bad, he's going to change the world. You also have to keep in mind that Jonathan's commitment to Clark and the need for Clark to keep his secret until he was properly ready for his own sake and for the sake of the world.
Wow, that music's obnoxious. Holy shit.
Was so complete that he was willing to die to protect it. And Clark knew that. Clark clearly wanted to go and save his father.
I love the little spinny effect for a few seconds later screenshot.
You could see it written all over his face, and probably would have saved anybody else in that situation. But Jonathan had spent Clark's entire life driving that message into him, that his identity had to be protected, because nothing short of the future of the world depended on it. It was that important to Jonathan, and Clark knew it. Jonathan Kent being willing to die was the ultimate expression of his love for Clark, and Clark being willing to let Jonathan die for that belief was the ultimate expression of his love and respect for him. And so, what some people call a silly scene, to me, is one of the most emotionally resonant and profound character moments in any film in the genre. With the death of Jonathan Kent, now is a good time to point out.
Now, he's missing what that should have been. So, throughout the movie, we should have been seeing the conflict between Jonathan Kent and Jor-El, because it's set up. It's there. This isn't me rewriting the movie. That conflict is baked in. They just don't do anything with it. So throughout the movie, we have that conflict. And then we get to the death of Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent holds up his hand. No, don't come save me. This is actually good. This works. And then you get to Superman, because that flashback scene with Jonathan Kent is Superman talking to Lois. We cut to Superman talking to Lois, and he says, I was wrong. I shouldn't have let my father die. He was wrong to stop me, and I was wrong to listen. That was supposed to be the birth of Superman, but it isn't. It just, essentially Jonathan dying because he doesn't want Superman to be exposed, and nothing fucking changes in that moment. We have to wait till years later for him to embrace to be Superman. He shouldn't become Superman in that moment. That scene is built for it. But it's not there.
Now, one of the other major strengths of the film, which is the cast. In particularly here in this situation, Diane
I'll give you that. Cast
and Lane as Martha. Why did you say that name? Kent. With Pa Kent gone, Clark needed another
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm watching George Lucas doing a Star Wars movies with these stock effects transitions. I thought I got bad with those. Woo.
Emotional anchor to his humanity, and by extension to our world, and that comes through brilliantly with his mother-son relationship and the chemistry between Lane and Henry Cavill. I bought into their attachment so much that when Zod and the other Kryptonians show up at the Kent farm and begin to harass Martha, all I could think was, holy shit, you have f***ed up. Clark is going to f*** you all up. So when Clark does arrive and grabs Zod and screams at him, you think you can threaten my mother? I nearly jumped out of my seat in the theater and yelled, yeah, Superman, this fool up. And I just don't know if I have that reaction if we didn't buy into Clark's attachment and relationship with his parents. The consistency of that connection to his parents is also a brilliant aspect to the movie that keeps paying off as the story moves forward. For example, when we come to the scene in the church as Clark is wrestling if he should turn him.
Now the issue with him, he didn't go into it. The issue of him charging into Zod is not, there's no issue with that. He's going to charge into Zod because of course he will. Zod's threatening his fucking mother. Of course he's going to protect her if he can. The issue is, what does he do? He plows him through a field, through a goddamn gas station, and there's all types of chaos. And what does he do? Does he attempt to, protect people? Because he just put a whole bunch of fucking lives at risk. No. Nothing at all. And it just, he's learning his powers. All it takes is a moment. All it takes is a moment for him to go, oh shit, I need to be careful. And we don't get that at all in this movie. At all. He just tears through stuff without caring. And it only takes a couple moments. We get one scene where he saves a guy in a helicopter, and then, people try to say, oh, he protects people by telling them to go inside. Fuck going inside. These are Kryptonians. They'll tear through your building like fucking paper. Going inside will not protect you. He saves a helicopter pilot, and he saves Lois multiple times. And he gets to make out with her in the wreckage, which is weird. There's probably some people you should probably be saving right now. I think I'm jumping ahead quite a bit, though.
himself over to Zod, the priest asks him, "What does your gut tell you?" Instead of just giving a standard...
Well, the cinematography in the scene tells me I'm fucking Jesus for the 15th millionth time in this movie. Yeah, no, that gets obnoxious because we get it. We get it. He's Jesus. He's Jesus. We get it. I feel like he's tap dancing around the actual issues with this movie by focusing on some of the strengths, because there are a lot of strengths. Like I said, this is close to a great Superman movie. This is so frustratingly close to a great Superman movie, but just feels like it half-asses so many great ideas.
Superman kind of response, we hear echoes of Jonathan Kent and his reservations. Superman says that Zod can't be trusted. The problem is, I'm not sure the people of Earth can be either. Pa Kent is always there with him. His fears, his teaching.
But he should be past this point in the story. Pa Kent already died. In fact, at this point in the story, he's already embraced being Superman. He's already put on the suit and done his first flight. He's had his meeting with Jor-El. He is Superman at this point. So him having this discussion, it doesn't quite work. That's the problem. This movie has all these pieces, and if you rearrange them, it could work a hell of a lot better. There's lots of tweaks you can do to this movie to make it great. There's great ideas in this movie. But it just kind of half-asses them.
And his reservations, and that was really obvious in this scene, and it's just beautiful. You see, that sort of narrative consistency...
Oh god, those stock transitions. Wow. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and be... we haven't gotten to the end. You know, I'll tell you my thoughts at the end.
Is present with all the characters in the movie, including General Zod and his core motivations. In his first conversation with Clark, Zod explains that he traveled to all the old Kryptonian outposts, finding nothing but death since they were all cut off from Krypton long ago. He tried everything and went to extraordinary lengths to try to save his people. This is important because it re-emphasizes that in Zod's mind, there really is nothing left of Krypton and therefore has to be regenerated from the Codex on Earth, even if that means resulting in the extinction of humanity. Okay, now here's where things get spicy. I want to talk about the most spectacular thing in Man of Steel, but also the source of most of its controversy: the incredible action. The combat action sequences in the third act of Man of Steel is some of the most awe-inspiring fight scenes in all of comic book movies. The fights are visceral, exhaustively paced, and completely unbound. Zack Snyder does a remarkable job of switching between taking us up close and intimate in the fights, and then changing gears to observe the battles from far away.
I don't think anybody would argue Zack Snyder doesn't know how to film a fight scene. He definitely does.
Making us in the audience feel like real spectators, as if we were actually watching this War of the Gods from the ground miles away. This perspective shifting engages us in the action and always feeling the heavy drama of it. And that's the key. The action is drama. Every comic book...
Yeah, the action does go on a bit long, though.
Film and action film, for that matter, has lots of action, but action without narrative purpose is just visual noise. Every punch, every crash, and every throw in the fights are soaked in the drama and narrative that the movie already laid the foundation of.
Is it? Is it? Like, yeah, you get that bit with Zod, and you could argue some goons, maybe, but it's mostly just a whole bunch of action. You haven't explained that. I mean, if that's how you feel, cool, but that's not an explanation. You just asserted that it's soaked in the drama of the movie, but it's not.
As Clark and Zod battle, we see the visual echoes of Clark's connection to humanity, his parents, and the end of his struggle for identity. We also see Zod with his perceived betrayal of Krypton and his desire and obsession of saving his people. When action in a movie is saturated in the drama of the story, it elevates it from just a fight scene to that of iconic dramatic conflict. It reminds me a lot of the battle on Titan in Infinity War. Every movement of action is anchored by narrative and drama that was foundational before the battle ever even started.
True, but here's the deal. If the Battle of Metropolis was a hell of a lot shorter. You won't get bored by it. It just keeps on going. The Battle on Titan isn't that long. And there's actually, if I recall, there's even a little break in them. Yeah, there's a break where they end up, like, essentially they have this big old battle, and then there's this break where they have them subdued, and then it just goes off into all-out battle again. And probably even more important, the heroes don't do great during that battle. They have a moment of victory, and then that's it. And then direct tension comes from the fact that after that, they're just getting their asses handed to them. Superman does decent in these battles. He does all right.
Only, Man of Steel got there first. There are those, however, that...
Oh, you want to go there? Fucking Transformers got there first, and Transformers sucks balls.
Disconnect from Man of Steel because of a belief that too much destruction was caused by the battles. That Superman didn't do enough to prevent collateral damage.
That critique exists because it's true. You want to argue, yeah, there'd be huge destruction. I can get behind you on that. But Superman, should have been doing more to save people. He just did his battles, and that was about it. I didn't, like, when the villains do something and people die, it's like, okay, maybe Superman can't do anything. But there's specific actions Superman does in the battle. And it distracts from the movie, because he does things that threaten people's lives in this movie during this battle. He is rubbing Zod's face into a building. God forbid there's anybody else on the other side of that glass. He is plowing him through gas stations. He is flying him through buildings. There is stuff Superman does specifically to Zod that could be killing people and would kill people. And that's the issue.
Some even say that Superman never thought or worried about saving people during his fights. And while I completely respect anybody who watched Man of Steel and simply didn't like it, this particular argument is, well, just ridiculous. For example, let's go to the fight between Superman and Faora in Smallville. During that scene, while Clark is trying to fight off two super-powered and military-trained Kryptonians, he diverts his attention to save individuals in no less than 3 different occasions. He saves the Air Force pilot when Faora was about to destroy his plane.
All right, brought up that
He
one.
saves the soldier from falling out of the helicopter, and he saves the colonel when Faora was about to...
Oh, yeah, no, he just... I forgot about the plane one. Yeah. Well, okay, so he saves 3 people. Okay. It still doesn't address my issue with what about the destruction he specifically causes. What about that destruction?
To knife him to death. The point is, Superman was always disengaging from his fights when it was possible, and it often wasn't, to turn his attention to saving people. So I reject that argument outright. Now, with regards to the criticism that Superman could have fought these Kryptonians without there being any collateral damage, well, I don't think the narrative of the story lends any credibility to that theory whatsoever.
Yeah, I would agree with him on that argument. Yeah, Kryptonians fighting anywhere, it's gonna be lots of collateral damage.
In debating the destruction of the battles between Superman and Kryptonians, you have to first understand what was at stake. The Kryptonians were not there to rob a bank. They weren't there to rule. They weren't there to steal some artifact.
Okay, so I'm gonna get to listen to him explain a point to me that I already agree with. Okay.
Zod and Faora and the rest of the Kryptonians repeatedly made it clear to Clark that their mission was the death of every single human being on Earth, to wipe out humanity. The grim words of Faora, "You will not win. For every human you save, we will kill 1,000,000 more." Combined with Zod's plan of terraforming humanity right out of existence, Clark was fighting these godlike beings for nothing short of the lives of every single man, woman, and child on the face of the Earth.
And he did it for approximately 5 hours of total runtime. I'm just saying.
Fighting to save billions of lives against vastly superior forces who outnumbered him and have been combat and military trained since their birth. Clark had been Superman for a day. And this is a significant point that I think a lot of people forget. Clark had been Superman, only really beginning to discover the potential of his abilities.
Okay, we're talking about the potential of the movie too, though, because this is where I get annoyed, because yes, he's just learning to be Superman. So he should be learning all the things he needs to be doing, like helping save people, like not throwing people through fucking buildings. He needs to be learning that, and we don't really see him learning that at all. When we see the action, we just see Kryptonian action, just these invincible Kryptonian people just punching the shit out of each other, and it gets kind of boring after a while. It really does. It's, like I said, I think this movie is fine. We'll get to my final thoughts on the movie.
Not to mention flight. For a little over a day, a unit of highly skilled and...
Is it established it's only a day? There's lots of flashbacks and stuff. I don't think it's a day. That seems a bit rushed.
Trained Kryptonian soldiers against a farm boy from Kansas. Basically, the fight was going to happen wherever the Kryptonians wanted the fight to happen, and there really wasn't much Clark could do about it except fight them nonetheless and try to save people where and when he could. By the way, a quick but important side note that I think needs to be thrown in here is another unique thing Snyder and Goyer do that not a lot of other comic book movies try. You see, in a lot of comic book films, humanity sits by and waits for the heroes to save them. But in Man of Steel, humanity plays an important part in their own salvation. While Clark is off in the Southern Hemisphere trying to take out the World Engine, it's up to humanity.
This is a point that is brought up, and I don't entirely disagree. I think humanity helping gets a little bit spotty here and there, but overall I like the idea they're shooting for, and I guess they more or less get it, because humanity does play a role in helping defeat the Kryptonians. So yeah, I guess I agree with him, but like I don't like his movie. I obviously don't like this movie as much as he does, so yeah.
To take out Zod's main ship. The military strike on Zod's forces near the end of the film, the Doctor figuring out how to get the House of El key to engage Kal-El's shuttle to ignite the Phantom Drive, the Colonel heroically sacrificing himself by flying his plane into Zod's ship, causing the Kryptonians on board to become trapped in the singularity, the pilots and soldiers engaging these gods from another world, all played an important part in Superman and the rest of humanity winning the day. And in the end, I've always really appreciated that about the story. Okay, now we come to the final fight between Superman and Zod. Keep Zod's mindset in mind here. After destroying the World Engine, Superman engages Zod, and when he was about to destroy the scout ship Zod was piloting and carrying the Genesis chamber, Zod pleads with Superman not to destroy it since it would end the Kryptonian civilization forever. In that moment, Zod not only sees himself as a great hero, but Kal-El as the villain about to do something monstrous in his eyes.
Is there an argument that Zod isn't a good villain? Because I think Zod is a very good villain in this movie. He seems to be defending against an argument. I guess maybe he's just justifying why the movie is so good. But yeah, Zod is a very good part of the movie. I don't really see an argument against that. Michael Shannon just chews the scenery delightfully in this movie. I love it.
The final destruction of Krypton. After the dust settles and Zod's Genesis chamber is eliminated, any hopes that Zod had of bringing back his race was destroyed. Zod is now a broken man and communicates to Clark that he has now nothing left to live for except to kill every human being on Earth to cause Kal-El pain. His mission was one of salvation for his people, but now it's...
Oh, I get it. He's justifying the death at the end, which we'll get to that.
Purely for the death of humanity out of pure vengeance. Zod once again reiterates to Clark, there is only one way this ends, Kal. Either you die or I do. Zod makes it perfectly clear that he has no reason to live now other than the destruction of Earth and that he will never stop. When their fight leads them to Clark having a rear choke on Zod, the script puts Superman into a position where he was forced to make a choice. With no viable options available to him to either restrain or subdue Zod, Superman has to decide to either kill Zod in that moment or allow Zod to continue to destroy everything around him and kill all the people that he can. This isn't a situation people want to see Superman in, and it isn't a situation that he asked for. But here he was, and a choice had to be made. His choice, his only choice, was to do the unthinkable and kill General Zod before he killed billions of people. The weight of that moment was made clear as Clark let out a painful cry after killing Zod. Not only did he kill somebody, he was now truly alone in the universe because, well, he killed the last of his species. It was a horrible moment, but a brave one for the filmmakers to put Superman in.
Okay, so I don't have an issue with this scene in a vacuum. This scene is actually kind of cool. I think it's interesting to put Superman in a situation where he has to kill somebody, and it's dark. It's, you know, there's not an easy option for him. He has to kill Zod, so he kills Zod. I am okay with that. I think it's actually a cool idea. My issue has always been, what do they do with it? He screams at the end. What does that scream mean? He just said it means he screams because he had to kill somebody, not set up. Where is it set up in the movie that he doesn't want to kill people? Where's that set up? Where's that set up that he has a no-kill rule? Like, yeah, he likes to go out and save pilots and Lois Lane. Where is it set up that he has a no-kill rule? So the other option is he's screaming because he's the last of his kind. Okay. Where is it set up that he has some sort of affinity for his kind? That's the thing. This movie, it wouldn't take much for these things to be set up because the pieces are there. They just don't commit to them. You could probably point to random moments here or there, but nothing is committed to in this movie. Because I bet you, if you start correcting me and saying, oh, he does it here, he does it there, I bet you every single fucking person in the comments will have a different answer, and that's a problem. Because the narrative should be more unified than that. It shouldn't be you are picking random stuff. It should be there. If it's not there, then it doesn't count the narrative. It's not there. That's the problem. Because I don't know if he screams because he killed somebody and he has a thing against killing people, or maybe he's the last of his race and he feels an affinity with the Kryptonian people, or maybe he just shat himself and it really kind of hurt. A Kryptonian shit would really hurt. It just kind of tore through him. He was like, oh fuck, that really hurt. I don't know which one of these it is. The movie doesn't tell us. That's a problem with the movie. The scene in a vacuum is actually really good. Almost all the scenes in this movie in a vacuum are really good. But they don't use them correctly.
As a matter of fact, the entire movie of Man of Steel avoided putting Clark in easy, clean, and tidy situations, and it ends the film on that same note. And that note was heavy and powerful at the same time. Any other interpretation of the events in those final moments are...
Wow, that looks so CGI. That still photo, ooh, that's very CGI.
Disregarding everything we know about the circumstances that the story led us to.
Oh yeah, did you realize that this movie has a Christ symbology in it? Christ symbolism? Did you notice this movie has Christ symbolism? Did you know that? Did you know that? By the way, this movie has Christ symbolism. Did you know it had Christ symbolism? You should know this movie had Christ symbolism.
And Superman too. And it was handled beautifully. And so...
Oh, this movie had Christ symbolism.
With brilliant mythology, outstanding dedication to character development, thrilling action, difficult moral dilemmas, a multidimensional villain, and a hero whose quest was not just to save the day, but also find himself and his place in the world, Man of Steel to me is one of the greatest films of the genre of all time, and easily the most underrated. Granted, it may not have been the most happy-go-lucky apple pie Superman many were looking for, but it's the one we needed and the one that worked better for our time. So thank you, David Goyer. Thank you, Zack Snyder, for the best iteration of the best superhero of all time. So there you have it, folks. Those are my reasons that I believe Man of Steel is one of the greatest comic book movies of all time and certainly the most underrated. And again, the purpose of this video is not to convince you to change your mind about anything, but hopefully during the course of this video, I've at least given you a few different perspectives to look at. Anyway, guys, that'll do it for this editorial. Thanks a lot for being here. My name is John Campea, and until my next video, bye-bye.
Okay, I sat through that. Yeah, some notes to John Campea. when you do a video essay, man, don't make the music that obnoxious. That was a bit much. No music would have been better than that. Your voice can carry it. Your voice is a lot better than mine. Believe in your voice. The transition edits were a bit much. Don't be afraid to do a little bit of editing in there. I know YouTube copyright gets rough. Clips of under 10 seconds are pretty safe. 8 seconds are super safe. You could do a little bit more than what you did. I appreciate that you like this movie that much, but I do feel like you're reading more into the movie than the movie even gives us. The movie is a collection of great ideas for a new, dark Superman movie. And part of the problem is it doesn't really seem to know what to do with those ideas. It is acting like it's grand and lofty. And honestly, if reconfigured just a little bit, I could see it being that way, but it's not. It's just kind of turns into this visually stunning, dumb action movie. It has great pieces in place for some great story arcs and some great conflicts, not just like punching each other conflicts, but actually ideological conflicts that it really doesn't pursue. Like, it never feels like Jonathan and Jor-El have a conflict in ideology. But if you look at how they approach their son, they do. They approach Clark and Superman very differently. Or maybe I should say Kal-El. They approach Clark and Kal-El very differently. And Superman has to choose which side he wants to be on. And of course, he chooses essentially a middle ground. But the movie doesn't take you on that journey. The movie it doesn't tell the story linearly. You're jumping around in time. And the movie doesn't even take full advantage of that story idea, because it could literally be jumping you around and showing you Clark's evolution into Superman by merging the past and the present. But it really doesn't, because he's pretty much Superman right from the get-go. So there's no real arc for him to evolve into, which is the problem. He shouldn't be fully committed to Superman until he puts on the suit, which is part of the problem. That should be the moment where he says, I'm going to be the hero. He sees his father die, and he realizes, fuck, what have I done? I let my father die, and it was a mistake. I never should have done that. What have I done? I have to make sure no one else's father dies, because I can do that, because I'm Superman. That should be his arc. Instead, it just feels like stuff happens to him, he puts on a suit, and he goes off and fights some Kryptonians. That's what the movie feels like. And like I said, I think this movie's okay. I don't think it's bad. I definitely won't call it bad. It's very flawed, though. And it's so close to being good. That's the thing about this movie. This movie is frustrating because it's so goddamn close to being good. And it's just not there. I feel like with lots of Zack Snyder stuff, people want to dig deep. And the problem is what they're looking for isn't actually there. So they force ideas to be there. You'll see video essays, and John Campea's here wasn't even the worst. I've seen hours talking about all the nuances of Batman v Superman. And oh my god, it doesn't change the fact that movie is almost boringly unwatchable. Man of Steel is okay. It's not as great as John Campea gives it credit for. It's probably not as bad as a lot of people say, too, because there's great ideas in this movie, and they just don't know what to do with them. And that's the problem.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.
I used to fuck guys like you in prison.